join me in welcoming this change maker and dynamic leader, Lisa Schroeder.
Thank you, Stephanie, for such a warm welcome. Wow, it's great to be here. The Pittsburgh Foundation is proud to support Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures. You treat us to precious time with talented literary artists, providing public access to their writing and their enlightening perspectives on issues. They are brilliant thinkers and storytellers. It is through their great works that we as readers come to understand our own humanity and see humanity in others. Which brings me directly to Terry Miller. It only takes reading a few pages into Behind God's Back, Finding Hope in Hardship to understand how gifted she is in describing the highs and lows of the human condition. She is a hell of a great storyteller. I'm proud to say that Terry has served on our board since 2017. For those who may not know, community foundations such as ours are unique philanthropic institutions. We bring people together from all walks of life to address the most pressing issues facing our community, from poverty and inequity to racism, education, and affordable housing. We do this work by listening intently and collaborating with people affected. Terry is a guiding force in this work. As you'll learn from Behind God's Back, Terry has experienced extraordinary challenges in her lifetime. She grew up in the Arlington Heights public housing community where she and her mother and brothers faced hunger and want on a daily basis. And like so many children of alcoholics, Terry turned to drugs and alcohol to mask the pain. In the 1980s, she found her way to rehab and began her journey to sobriety. At age 30, she enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh, earning both bachelor's and master's degrees in social work. So launched her 25-year career, working to bring people together through the programs of Pitt's Institute of Politics, where she ultimately served as the Institute's director. She was named to that role by her friend and our facilitator tonight, University of Pittsburgh Chancellor Emeritus Mark Nordenberg, who now chairs the Institute of Politics. I'm sure Mark and Terry would both agree that nowhere is a degree in social work more useful than in politics. I had the pleasure of meeting Terry in this role, and it is instantly obvious how talented Terry is, how smart, how facilitative and supportive and solicitous of the vast numbers of people that she has engaged around solving the most complicated problems that face our region. And as her story in the book reveals, she is absolutely, completely dedicated to being in service to others. Anyone who's partnered with Terry knows that her enthusiasm for taking on the tough stuff is contagious. What I did not know about Terry is how brave she has had to be over the course of her life, and certainly in writing this book. Her memoir is about redemption, and her telling of it carries great empathy. It explores what is commonly known as imposter syndrome, that feeling of how did I get here and how long until all of these people figure out that I don't belong. But Terry has a way of making it clear that we all belong at the table, that every story and every life has inestimable value, that we all matter. In writing this book, she shares in the prologue, I recount what amounts to my journey home. Terry, your story gives us all hope that no matter the obstacles thrown in front of us, each of us can become the person we were meant to become, hopeful, powerful, and filled with gratitude. And it is especially because all of us who are lucky enough to know Terry know that it is never about her, but always about the comfort of others, that I am absolutely delighted that the Pittsburgh Foundation can sponsor an evening that is all about Terry. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Terry Miller and Mark Nordenberg.
Lisa, thank you for those kind words. And Stephanie for the introduction this evening. Thank you all for being here tonight as well. I'm going to charge right in because that's what I do. This reading is from the first chapter of my book, Mrs. Wellington's Party. Just before we moved from the projects, our upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Wellington, threw a party. Mama, who had suffered frequent dark spells, was in a rare animated mood and decided and announced to me and my older brother, Eddie, that we were going to a party. I squealed with delightment when Mama told Eddie to start a bath for me. I was in and out of the tub in a flash. Dressed in my best PJs, I perched on the dresser and watched as Mama applied an array of oils, lotions, powder, and polish to her face. Then in a gulp, she finished her whiskey sour, applied Kiss Me Red lipstick to her lips, and we were on our way. In the dimly lit hallway of apartment number 2 in building number 3 in courtyard number 7 of the projects, we knocked on the door several times waiting for Mrs. Wellington to appear. All we had to do was go upstairs to get to the party, but every aspect of the evening felt out of the ordinary to me, enriched and ceremonial. Mrs. Wellington swung open the door, greeting us with a smile. She was a large, beautiful woman with skin the color of Tootsie Rolls. She often wore low-slung blouses and tight sweaters to show off her large chocolate breasts. The men fell all over her. I loved being around her too because she always smelled so good and she was sassy. Oh, Marie, I'm so delighted you determined to come, and the little ones are here as well. Hi, Miss Bessie, I squealed, hugging her around the waist. Would you like a soda, she asked. Oh, please, a cherry one if you have it. Eddie conceded. Mama, Marie, the drinks are in the kitchen. Make yourself at home, Mrs. Wellington said. Thank you, Betty. Don't mind if I do. Eddie, you mind your sister, and both of you mind your manners. Yes, ma'am, we said in unison. Mama disappeared into the kitchen. Eddie and I made our way through the crowded, smoke-filled room as a group of men and women swayed to the pulsating beat of the girl from Ipanema. Never seen anything like this before, Eddie, I said. Yeah, that Mrs. Wellington, she sure has some fine stuff for living in the projects. And look at all that food, he said, pointing to a nearby table. Eddie and I oogled the trays of chips and salsa, chicken wings and legs, grits and greens, and potato and bean salads. The thing that caught my eyes were these teeny little hot dogs that were wrapped in dough. Catching Mama's eye, looking in her direction, I reached for the tiny hot dog and asked, Mama, can I have one? Securing her an approving nod, I dove in. What are you so happy about, little miss? A man said, approaching the couch. Well, that's my mama over there dancing, and she said I could have one of these little hot dogs. You ever see anything like this before? I like my hot dogs with ketchup, but I don't see how you put it on with the bread already wrapped on it. Heinz 57 is my favorite. Mama makes soup out of it sometimes. You think Mrs. Wellington has any, I asked. The man laughed. Well, I'll bet she does, but why don't you try some of that chicken over there, he said. Well, I had my heart set on these little hot dogs, right? But my mouth watered at the thought of a chicken leg. Surely Mama wouldn't mind. Around this time, our meals were cobbled together from surplus wartime rations distributed at the old Croatian Center on Carson Street. We would wait in a long line once a month to carry powdered eggs and milk, government cheese, and peanut butter back to our apartment in the projects. Toward the latter half of the month, our food ran thin, and we would have to ration out meals, with each of us skipping on certain days. Since Mama had sugar, I knew that she needed to eat, and sometimes skipped more meals than I should have. Now, though, my full attention was on the juicy chicken leg on my plate. Never before had I ever had a full chicken leg to myself. When we did have chicken, Mama and Eddie ate the skin and the meat, and I got the meat on the bones and the knuckles. Mama always said the meat closest to the bone was the sweetest, and it should go to the sweetest one in the family, and that was good enough for me. Smacking my lips around the chicken leg, I watched Mama dancing off in the corner with several men. She had another drink and cigarette going, and she laughed heartily at something that one of her admirers had said. In a daze, and really against my will, I was reminded of our trips to the local bar, where Mama would dance with men in exchange for some money or for a meal for me and Eddie. The worst part was when she would summon me from a booth and telling me to give Jimmy a spin. Jimmy, or Jumbo Jim as I called him, worked at the butcher's counter in the local food market. I know now that he was one of Mama's regular Johns. On more than one occasion, I would endure the stench of the blend of Old Spice and bologna on Jimmy's sweaty and grease-smeared clothes as he would press my head against his hardness during a suffocating slow dance. There was no intervention from patrons or from Stan, the bar's owner, or even from Mama, lost in the lustful attention of her admirers. For me, it was a horrifying nightmare set to the Duprees, "You belong to me," and the inescapable knowledge that Jimmy and Mama's nightcap would echo in my ears long into the night. In the morning, I would find Mama on the couch with a crumpled wad of damp bills stuffed in her bra, feeling relief, not despair, knowing that if Mama didn't drink it up, we would have something to eat, at least for a while. Eddie, who had gone off to say hello to a friend, came back and said, "Come on, sis, I'm taking you home." We headed into the kitchen. Mama had on that familiar 5 highball glow about her, and I was sure that things were no longer in focus. Reaching in through the crowd and pulling on her blouse, Eddie resentfully announced, "I'm taking Terry home, Ma. She's tired." "All right, sweetie, you go on now. Take your sister downstairs and you look after her." "Yes, Mama," we droned, making our way out the door, knowing quite well by this time in our young lives that a little bit meant forever when you're 6 and 8 years old, waiting for your mother to come home. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Terry, for writing this amazing book and for being here tonight, both to read from it and to discuss it with us. As young as the two of us look and feel, people would probably find it hard to believe that we've been hanging out with each other for more than a quarter century.
Yeah, I know.
And throughout that time, the Terry Miller that I have known has been a happy, self-confident, hard-working, high-achieving professional of real impact. In fact, I often have said that one of the great decisions I made in 19 years as Chancellor was naming you the director of the Institute of Politics. And when I look at the cover of your book, and I see the cute young girl in her swimming suit with the pool behind her and a big smile on her face, I think, well, this is natural. A happy child becomes a happy adult. But I guess both Lisa's introduction and your reading have shattered that myth. Instead, the reading foreshadows a childhood that was characterized by a range of hardships: poverty, hunger, neglect, abuse. How did you make it through? How does a child find the strength and the skill, really, to cope with the kind of setting in which you were raised?
Wow, great question, Mark. And it's really delightful to be on a stage with you again. Anyway, our collaboration and our partnership over the years is just one of the highlights of my life. Right, yeah. So, that the story that I shared, this little one here, she had a little spirit and spunk about her, right? She knew what she wanted. Those tiny hot dogs, she knew what she wanted. And she had a light about her. And, you, as a member of my literary village, helping me to birth this book, that we talk from time to time about the idea of resilience and how people survive difficult things, and it still is a big question mark for me. Like, why does one member of a family that is experiencing the same things that we're all experiencing wind up doing well with that situation where other members of the family are not able to do that? And I don't know, I think I was the child in the family that had this resilience, that had this spark. I would say that my brothers not so much, didn't have that. And here's the truth. There was a lot to navigate. My mother's poor health, her depression, her medicating those conditions with alcohol, the consequences of her drinking behaviors, her impaired decision-making, all of those things. My father being gone, and he's out the door, and the financial resources went out the door with him. And we were moving from the projects. I grew up in primarily spent the first 7 years of my life in an African-American community, and we were moving only barely a mile away, but I was moving to a white neighborhood. And so I was moving from the unknown, from the known to the unknown, and it seemed like an unbridgeable gulf to me. So I had this resilience and the other thing that was happening early on too is that the social welfare people were starting to sniff around, right? And I knew that there was a chance that our family would be separated. So I did whatever I needed to do to try to keep us together. And I know that sounds, remarkable, that a child of 7, 8, 9, 10 years old would think that way, but I did, and I did what I had to do. And I also, had a role model that showed me that a way to deal also was to use alcohol. And it was not long into my young adolescence when I learned to pick up a drink to cope too. So I'm not certain that really gets to it, but there were, I was high functioning from the time I was a child. Why, how, I don't know. And I also learned to pick up a drink to cope too.
Well, you were high functioning in a range of amazing ways. And it is interesting to read what you have written about that time in your life and the insights that you had that really were beyond your years. And one of the things I was really looking forward to about being out here with you was the thought that maybe I could read a couple of passages that you had written, because I knew I couldn't write anything this well myself. So here's one short paragraph where you're sitting on a staircase with your mother as the day is about to begin. I sat there with Mama while she stared out at the rising sun, drinking her coffee and wincing with each sip. I realized that for her, the morning was a kind of torture, the dawn of a new day that I relished as my time to live, explore, and thrive was for her an excruciating repetition of suffering. That's an amazing insight. And then there was the day that your mother had gone to the hospital and she was gone for a few days, and you had a neighbor kind of checking in on you, but not too frequently. And you were outside, and your mother came home in a cab, and she was holding something, and it turned out to be your baby brother. And you said, "I could not believe that there could be a day more wonderful than this one. Nor could I know that this was the day I would become responsible for the care and well-being of this child. I already was a parentified child, placed in the impossible state of being responsible for my mother's happiness and health. Somewhere along the line, our roles had become reversed." Well, whether it was resilience, whether it was kind of savvy beyond your years, or a combination of those and other things, you did make it through.
Yes.
But as you transitioned from childhood to adolescence to being a young adult, you didn't leave it all behind you.
No.
There were wounds and scars and bruises that you carried forward. How did your childhood affect the earlier years of your adult life?
That's a really good question, Mark. Well, a lot happened in my young adulthood, right? Because, I did in my, from the time I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I found alcohol. And I used that to cope, to help me get through my life experiences. And that use and dependence on substances, by the time I was 18 years old, I knew I was already addicted. I knew that my dependence, that there was absolutely nothing social about the way that I used drugs and alcohol. So the use of those substances helped to keep the emotional and spirit-stripping experiences of what happened to me at bay, right? That it helped to keep that at bay. And I continued to drink until I was drinking and used drugs until I was about 26 years old. So it worked until it stopped working, and any of us, who have a problem with, substance use disorder, know that eventually that stuff will stop working. So I got sober, and when I got sober, all of that stuff that was back there, over time, started to present itself, and I needed to deal with that. So the turning point, a major turning point for me in my life, is when I reached out and asked for help, when I allowed myself to be vulnerable and to say, I need help. And that was a huge turning point, because now all things are possible, right? But until I got there, I was trapped. So I carried all of that with me. You and I had a conversation a while ago, long before COVID, and you graciously did a read on one of my later drafts of the book, and you said to me, there were several of us sitting at the table, and you said, we're all leaders here, and we all are accomplished people, but the thing that's different about you, Terry, is that you healed yourself. And I remember taking that in. I didn't heal myself. I made myself available. I allowed myself to become vulnerable and to be willing to allow the healing to happen. But that meant that I had to open up and I had to avail myself to others who could be of service to me and to receive that help.
And that was a huge change because, again, you really had no help when you were younger.
No.
And in fact, if you looked around for the helpers, as you said, the people who had a responsibility to help were people you feared. Because the worst thing you thought was to have your family broken up, to be taken away from your mother.
Right.
So how did you come to the point of realizing that you couldn't do everything yourself and that you didn't need to do everything yourself, that there were others who would be of help to you moving forward?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question, right? So this thing about, what I like to say about the book is that, the early chapters are difficult. But this is really a good news story, ladies and gentlemen. This is really a good news story. And it really, the good news happens, right? When I do that reaching out and I ask for help. Now, I happen to work with somebody who, was fighting his own battle with alcohol and had a come to Jesus moment, and he got sober, and I watched him. I bird dogged him, man. I spied on this guy because I was like, how's he doing that? And I was shoving. I was a true garbage can, but if it would take me sideways, I was putting it inside me. And but I watched this guy, and when I was in that moment of emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual despair, in that moment, something happened in me, and I reached out to him and asked for help. And the rest of the story is about these moments of these amazing people that showed up in my life, these wonderfully beautiful, imperfect characters who just kind of showed up and helped me, to make my way. And I really want to stay with this for a second, because this thing about what I learned about asking for help is that there's no perfection in that, right? It's a messy connection, right? I mean, you have to show up out of a place of vulnerability, and there's no perfection in that, and the other person reaches back in a spirit of a gesture of kindness and compassion, and it's in the heart of that gesture, right, where the perfection lies, and so this idea of asking for help, giving and receiving, is really quite magical, and it takes risk for both the person who is asking for help and the person who is receiving help. There's a literary critic, 20th century, turn of the 20th century, Lawrence Lerner, also a poet, and he talked about this idea of this notion of asking for help as, as the reaching out with the palms up, asking for help in this way, and another hand reaching back to give that help and provide that assistance is just a simple twist of the wrist, right? A simple twist of the wrist. And at any point in my life, I can be on either side of that twist. When I was a child, I was palms up, baby. I was asking for it. I was looking for it. And there were not people reaching back. When I got sober, in that moment, that grace that happened where I reached out and asked for help, and somebody reached back to provide that assistance, my life turned around. Everything changed. And the rest of the book is about these really kind of magical, if you will, moments where I avail myself and allow myself to be vulnerable. And there's magic in that. It's scary, but there's also magic in it.
Will you also make clear that asking for help, particularly when dealing with addiction, is harder for women than it is for men? Why is that?
Well, I think there's a stigma that that continues to haunt women who are living with either mental or behavioral health problems. Just in general, all people, but I think especially for women, there's a stigma that continues to be there. And and once I got sober, and I determined that I was filled with such joy to have a life that I wanted to help and be of service. I wanted to help other people like me, right? I wanted to help other people like me. And so I really, saw that there were the treatment models that were available back in 40 years ago. 40 years ago, there were no treatment programs for women. That there was, the treatment models were basically, male-oriented, androcentric models that really didn't fit, certainly my personal experience. And then as I began to work in the field, the experience of other women who I worked with. And so there's this, there's this structural stigma where we have policies and practices and procedures and laws that really hamper, for women, what it is that they can do in terms of having access to care. And then you overlay that with the public perception, so there's a public stigma and then a personal stigma, right? So people have, engage in behaviors and beliefs and, perceptions of people, especially women, who are living with substance use disorder, and it's more difficult for them to be able to find access to quality care, if they'll even go, because people who typically have behavioral and mental health problems are seen as being individuals who, should have some control over it, right? And they're not, that they're responsible in some way for the condition that they're living with. So anyway, so there's like a double standard. That's a long way of saying there's a double standard. And I would say 40 years later, we're still dealing with it.
Well, and you gave one specific example, I think, of something that you were trying to do at Turtle Creek in your work in terms of intake procedures, where you make a point. This is all different for men than it is for women. Can you say something about that?
Right, yeah, I was really proud that I worked at Turtle Creek Valley, MHMRDNA at the time it was called, that we were having conversations about the need to start to structure some program offerings for women that put the woman at the center of attention, that beyond their drug and alcohol use, what were the other issues that women were dealing with, right? And women had histories of abuse and neglect and domestic violence and those kinds of things, motherhood issues, right? So how is it that we can start to look at women and the issues that they're dealing with and develop some protocols that will start to address not just the substances that women are using, but the life issues that they're dealing with as well. Women, my experience, my personal experience, and my experience of working with women over the years is that it was kind of an inside-out process. I already knew that my drinking and my drug use took me to horrible places. I was full of shame and regret and despair. I didn't need to be browbeaten into that. I knew that. And I'm not saying that it's true for all women, but for a lot of the women who I was seeing back in those days as a counselor, this is what I saw, and as did the other practitioners that I work with. So our agency started to to develop protocols to address those issues. That was the beginning for me of, well, this is just a little drop in the bucket. We need so much more than this. Come on,
And here comes power.
Here come power.
Hence-
Here it comes. That's right. Here it
And the applause that you're getting reinforces my belief that this has got to be one of the great triumphs of your life.
Yeah.
To battle your own battles, to begin helping others, to see that there is a need for something different, and then to go out and found the Pennsylvania Organization for Women in Early Recovery. Talk a bit about that.
Well, well, first of all, Dot T, who you meet in the book, was somebody who I worked with at the agency, Turtle Creek Valley, and she was in the mix of these programs, this new program, outpatient program for women that we were developing at the time, and I was having conversations. We and other staff members were having conversations about the need for so much more for women. That there were, we did like an informal survey to see where are the long-term treatment beds for women. Well, guess what? In Pennsylvania, there weren't any. There were a few co-ed beds in Butler County, but that was it. And so there was this clear gap in services for women, and so I started talking with the treatment providers that I was working with. I was working with other women, other professionals out in the community. I was taking a community organizing class at the University of Pittsburgh where I made it to college because somebody said to me, "Did you ever think of going to college?" And I was like, "No, poor kids from the projects don't go to college, But Miss Yvette saw something in me that I was unable to see in myself at that time, and she encouraged me to go, and I went. And I was going to be a social worker, and I was going to help these drug addicts and alcoholics just like me. And I wandered into this community organizing class, and I got bit by a bug, and I got bit, and anyway, so so all of these things. So I had like this orbit that I was, floating around, and I started to connect dots, and I started to think about, with this organizing, well, maybe there's a way that we can create something out here in the community for women. And just, I started to connect the dots, and the people started to show up. And I stole the tagline from that movie, "If we build it, they will come," and we built it, and they came, and you keep coming. Thank you. Please keep coming. Please keep coming.
Well, there are so many dimensions to that story that we could really talk about it all night. But one of my favorite parts of the book has to do with your interactions with Sister Joyce and Father Cheatham, and arranging for Power to have a home in Swissvale.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so here's the most important thing, right? That, we were riding around. I have to give a shout out to Tom Murphy, former mayor of Pittsburgh and state legislator, who became one of our first and early on supporters, and he provided some staff to take us out to look at some buildings, and they were like big old warehouses, and I'm like, "Oh, this isn't the place, that's not the place." And so we heard that there was this convent in Swissvale that that they were looking to lease because there weren't as many sisters in the house anymore, so they were downsizing. and the nuns were going to be taken off to a smaller property, and they were looking for use of this facility. And I was like, aha. And we walked on that campus, and we went into that convent and met the nuns and Sister Joyce, and I was like, oh yeah, this is it. So, you know, so I have to talk about Mo too, because I'm in this community organizing class, and Mo is teaching me so much about, you know, how you go out into the community and make big change happen. And I was trying to think about, what is it that I want these people to know? If we're interested in using this building, how is it that what story do we want to tell? And what I determined, or those of us who were working together at that time on the project, is that we needed to focus on recovery, not on addiction. We needed to like this book, we needed to let Father Cheatham and Sister Joyce and the church council and everyone know that this is about people getting well. And so it was a strategy, but it was also the truth, you know. So so I remember the conversation, and Sister Joyce was a huge champion from the front door. I love her. And I remember the conversation with Father Cheatham, where, you know, he listened to our proposal, and we had an exchange where I said to him and to Sister Joyce, the only thing that we're asking is to be able to use this beautiful facility that you have here, that has been a home to women who are on a spiritual path and a spiritual journey. And all we're asking is that you allow us to continue to use this building for women who are on a spiritual path and a spiritual journey. And it resonated, and it was the truth. And 30 years later, it is still the truth. 30 years later, and Rosa Davis and the Power team shout out, right? And we are continuing, if you build it, they will come, and people keep coming.
Well, I like that if you build it, they will come, but we all see, even from that brief description of what went into making this happen, that it wasn't a simple thing.
No.
And if there hasn't been a case study done of power, there should be one, because when you think too about the not in my neighborhood syndrome, you know, you had to deal with that too, yes. And you dealt with it in the same direct way, persuading people
Yes.
that they ought to look at the goals and the mission and the good products that would come out of this use. It really was, in a way, giving credit to the people to whom you were making the presentation, too.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
if you told them something good, they would relate to it. Now, you've mentioned Tom Murphy, you've mentioned Mo Coleman, and I think, again, here is this young Terry Miller girl who has no one to help her. And then you get into adulthood, and there are people like Dot and Jack and Miss Yvette that we don't know much about, but they come alive in the book, and you see how important they are to you and what you have become. And then there are the big names. I mean, you know, there's Dr. Abraham Twersky, who, you know, what a powerful figure he was. And Tom Murphy, who became the mayor, and Mo Coleman, who, you know, helped everybody in so many ways that, you know, I'm glad we did a book about his life, too. So what is it that made you kind of a magnet for these kind of mentors?
Wow.
Because we'd all like to have people like that helping us.
Yeah, right. I don't know that I know the answer to that, Mark. And I put you on that list too. I mean, the years that we worked together at the Institute. I really am at a loss on how to answer that. I know that that when doors were cracked open by various people who were in my life, I was smart enough to walk through them. So that if somebody said to me, hey, you ought to go talk to somebody, talk to this person over here, or, if you're thinking about that, you might want to go do this. Well, I show up and I do it. I mean, I don't, and some people will, I'm kind of an irons in the fire kind of girl, right? Like, they may not get hot, but I'm going to stick the iron in, right? And sometimes, it's led me to these different people. And I'm not sure how it happened, but
Well,
I'm
I can
incredibly
answer
grateful.
that question for you to some extent, and that is, you do have to reach out, and you do have to connect. But then you have to be offering something that leads a person in a position like the positions those three individuals held, to say, yeah, there's something here. Something good will come from helping this person. All three of them would have said, that's what happened with Terry Miller. The investment that I made paid big dividends for a lot of people in ways that matter to me. And so it's like you were saying when you talked about your conversations with Father Cheatham and Sister Joyce, and it was the truth.
It was the truth.
Now, you said that you grew up without books, and now you've written this amazing book, and you also have said that the writing of the book was a part of a continuing healing process.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think our stories are, they're so important. They're so important to ourselves, and I think that they're important to share. And I think about them as these little time capsules, that carry meaning, the meaning of our lives in them, and that through the writing process, it allowed me to, to kind of, they kind of think of them like a dry wartime rations, which of course I know a few things about. But when we tell them, and I did my telling in the writing, that it moistens the stories and it softens them and it makes them more palatable, especially if it's a difficult story, right? And I, moistened my story, through years of sweat and tears that I leaked all over the pages of this book. And what that does is the meaning of my life has awakened, right? So, and it's in that awakening there is healing, right? So why should any of you care about that, right? Because I believe, and I believe this is true, I really do, that to the extent that individuals heal, societies heal, right? And I really think that there is truth in that. And so, and beyond that, there is, I think, mutual healing that goes on. there's also healing that takes place in the interactive space between the writer and the reader, right? So, so when you read my story and when you buy the book and read my story, I want you to read for your story. I want you to read for your hardships and the difficult times that you had in your lives, and who, and who were those amazing, wonderfully flawed individuals, imperfect people that showed up, in the heart of the gesture and offered help. And how did that transform you? And how did that change your life? And then what did you do out of that transformation? How then did you pay it forward, or how then did you show up in your community, or in your family, or in your neighborhood, right? So there's a healing that takes place, but it's not my healing, just my healing. It's not, this is not my stories here, but it's all of our stories. We all have hardships. And also the important thing about telling the stories too, is it allowed me to right-size my trauma, right? To right-size it. Because I am so much more than my trauma. We all are. We all have hardships, and we're so much more than that, right? And anyway, so I think that that's true, but that's the some of that healing that takes place.
Well, we've talked a lot about the inside of the book, and I began by making reference to this wonderful photograph on the cover. One thing we haven't talked about is the title, Behind God's Back. What does that mean?
Oh, well, glad you asked. Glad you asked. Here's the story on that. Dot asked me, "Tell me, Terry, where did you grow up?" "Arlington Heights," I said, back the projects. Dot sucked in her breath, shook her head, and moaned, "Oh, mercy, child, my, way up there on that hill behind God's back." I felt her words. She knew, and she was right. There were many nights I felt that I was growing up in the long, cold shadow of the back of God. And that's where the title came from.
Well, from beginning to end, a wonderful book. And now that we know Behind God's Back refers to a neighborhood here, you're being a part of, and in fact, you're kicking off this Made in Pittsburgh series for 2022, is perfect not only because it's an extraordinary book, but because it is an extraordinary book written about an extraordinary life lived here in Pittsburgh. So let's all congratulate and thank Terry. And I know that as between the two of us, as has been characteristic of our relationship, Terry gets the last word tonight.
Thanks, Mark. I just want to say, first of all, thank you all for showing up and for your support this evening. And I do have to do some thank yous, so please give me a moment to do that. My family there are watch parties going on around the country, and I just want to thank my family for supporting me and loving me through this. Mary Ellen, you're my heart, and all of you all, thank you all. I'm just to my family for loving me through all of this. And the actual book itself, I have to say that this is a self-published book, and I was very fortunate to receive a literary award last year that provided a grant that allowed me to start the process of publishing this book. But I have to say there are two people that I really want to call out, and that is actually my stepson, Stephen Jarrett, who is an amazing literary talent. And he has served as my developmental editor, and he and I rolled up our sleeves about 5 years ago, and we dove in, and I refer to him as my book doula. This book would not be here if it were not for Stephen. And in terms of the beautiful cover on the book that you mentioned, Mark, and the beautiful layout on the inside, this book was designed with Rainey Oberman-Dermond. And Rainey, I know you're here somewhere. I can't see you, but I know you're here with your beautiful family and friends. I just want to thank in particular both of them for helping us to launch Hail the Goer Books. We have an imprint, and producing, this is our first book that we produced. So Rainey and Stephen, thank you so much. And then finally, Mark, my literary village, so, my elders, Mark, you, Edie Shapira, Max King, Bruce Barron, Aaron Lauer, Kathy McCauley, all of you for staying with me and reading draft after draft after draft, and staying with me until we got the product that we have here today. And thank you all. My friends who are here, thank you for loving me and supporting me through all of the years, through our adventures, tears, and joyous times over the last 40 years. I'll stop talking. Thank you all so much for being here.
And she won't say it, so I will. Buy the book. They're right over here. I've got a big bag full of them already. I was first in line.